Hello, my name is Keith Knuth, and this is a tutorial on the ION messaging service that's part of Infor OS. Now, ION is a system integration platform that is part of Infor OS. And IMS, or the ION messaging service, is a REST API for ION's message queue. Why would you want to use the IMS service? Well, because passing these type of transactions through the message queue allows you to take advantage of ION's powerful routing, monitoring, transformation, and workflow features. And any application that is registered in the ION API Gateway can access this IMS service. And any message type that's supported by ION can also be sent or received through IMS. And that includes a business object document, delimiter separated files, JSON, or the any format, which is used for files without any schema, like a binary file. Now, before we begin a demonstration of this interface, let's go through the steps that we're going to do. First, we have to define a schema in the ION data catalog to tell ION what we're going to be sending. In our demonstration, we're going to use one of the preloaded BOD schemas. Then we're going to define a connection point in ION to tell ION what this other application is that's going to be sending in data. Then we're going to create a document flow that tells ION how the data is going to flow out of this connection point that we're creating to this other application into an Infor application. Then we're going to tell the gateway to authorize this other app to use the API. Then we're going to explore or test the IMS API in the gateway just like a developer would to learn how the API works. We're going to test that API call from outside ION, just like a developer would, to make sure the API is working. And we're going to see that message come in, and we're going to check inside ION for any errors and make sure the message was accepted. In real life, you would probably then check your target application, an Infor ERP application, for example, to make sure the message made it from your external app through ION and on into the Infor app. Let's take a look at how this works. All right, we said the first step that we need to do is make sure there is a schema available in the ION data catalog for the type of document that we're going to send in so that ION can understand it. We said that in this example, I'm going to use a standard document that ION provides out of the box. But remember that you can choose any one of these file types here. We're going to choose that standard type that we call a BOD. If you're not familiar with the BOD, please link out to the video that's appearing in the upper right hand corner right now that I've recorded explaining what a business object document is in the ION world. In our example, we're going to use a sync sales order BOD, so I'll just search for that. Yep, it's preloaded. It's already available right there. If in your case you want to send in some file that is not a standard file that ION understands, no problem. You can define your own custom schema, and there's another video on how to do that. So there is a link appearing in the upper right hand corner to guide you through how to add a custom document into this data catalog. But we've got our sales order document that we're going to send in, so that's great. The next step we said was to define a connection point. So up here under Connect Connection Points, you would hit Add and define a connection point to this other third party, this other outside piece of software that is going to send in data through the IMS interface. I've already started to do that. Normally you would just click that Add button, fill in a name. This logical ID type and logical ID are going to be important, so just fill in whatever you want. I've just called it generic for right now, some kind of descriptive name for your app, but remember what that logical ID is. Now you can see the very first option we have in defining this connection point is whether the application has an IMS endpoint. This just means that the application is not going to be just sending information in, but it's going to be receiving it. And so ION needs to know where that endpoint is out there in the internet to connect to. Our example is going to be simple. The external app is just going to be sending data in, not receiving, so I'm going to leave this blank. The next client ID app will be filled in for us, and so on the next tab, the only thing left is to tell ION what is allowed to be sent from this application. We're going to allow shipments and sales orders. I just hit the plus button and selected those documents from our data catalog. I'll save this and then move on to the next step, which we said was to define a document flow. So connect data flows, hit the plus button, and select a document flow. I've already started one here. I've named it something generic. And my first thing to do was to drag an application step onto this document flow. And in that application step, select the connection point that we just defined. I've done that, and now I'm going to drag a second connection point, application connection point onto the flow, and select some other Infor application that I want to send the data to. In this case, it's Infor WMS. And then this little icon between those two connections is what documents this particular document flow is going to handle. I've hit the plus button and selected both of these documents from the data catalog. Save this, activate it, and now ION is ready to route these messages between these connection points. The next step requires us to go over to our API Gateway administrative interface. And the first thing we'll do is click on Authorized Apps and create a new app that's authorized to connect to our API Gateway and send this message in. So click on New App, give it a name, and tell it what kind of app it is. In this case, I'm going to be using the Postman service. It's a web-based application, so I'm selecting Web. I've already started defining that here, so I've called it a name, given it a description. If you've seen our other videos on how to use Postman to interact with API Gateway, you know that this is the correct redirect URL and JavaScript origin URL to use. We're going to use OAuth 2 to connect to it, and so I'll go back up here, hit save. That's going to give me the ability to download my OAuth 2 credentials, so I'm going to download that file. And again, if you've seen our other videos on how to connect to the API Gateway, you understand why that file is so important and how to use it with Postman. So if I've got this saved, I can move on to taking a look at the IMS API itself. I'll go into Available APIs, the ION API Suite, find the Messaging Service endpoint, click on Documentation. This is our Swagger documentation. I'll look for the latest version. I always want to use the latest and greatest. It's V3 in this case. And look at the post method here, right? This API that ends with multi-part message is just what I want. I can click the Try It Out button. I'm going to very quickly fill in these fields. The tenant that I'm working in, the logical ID that I took from our connection point. Remember I said to remember that logical ID that was defined there, and then the document that we want to send in. The next input is a parameter request file. This is kind of metadata about what the message contains or what it's about. I'm going to go ahead and select a JSON file that I've created. An example is right here in the Swagger, and I've customized this just slightly for my sales order and my lid that I'm sending in. And then I also need to choose a file for the actual message itself. In this case, it's going to be XML because it's a business object document. And then lastly, it wants the client ID of the authorized app that's making this call. So back when we defined the authorized app, I said the OAuth 2 credentials were created for us, and it gave us a client ID in that screen. You can just copy and paste that right in here and hit execute. Now what you'll get is that the gateway gives us this curl string, which is like a command line string to call the API from the operating system. It'll also give us the endpoint, the full endpoint URL to call to make this sync sales order message send. And so this is all very helpful to the developer so that he can take this information and go back and use it to program his application to send this message. What you will notice is that we'll get an actual error here saying that we're not authorized when we test this. That's okay, because here we're just exploring the API and understanding what the inputs are. Now that we have all this information, let's take the same data that we learned from exploring the Swagger and put it into our client application to send the message. So here in my Postman test client application, I've clicked the New button. I've chosen the Post method. I've pasted in the endpoint that the Swagger result gave me, so with the sync sales order at the end, so I know exactly what to hit here. On the very first tab of parameters, I've chosen the two parameters that the Swagger gave me, the logical ID and the document name. I've entered in the values there just like I had them in my Swagger. On the authorization tab, I've chosen OAuth 2 and successfully retrieved a token to use. This was how to do this was shown in a previous video that a link should be appearing on your screen right now about how to use Postman and how to do the OAuth 2 authentication. So I'm not going to go through that part again. Next is the headers tab. There were 2 header parameters that I had to fill in, the tenant ID and the client ID, and then the body parameters, which was that JSON file was kind of like metadata about what I'm sending, and the sales order bod itself. Notice that there's no XML extension on the sales order bod file. With all that filled in, I can hit the send button, and I can see that my request came back with a 202, that my message was processed successfully by the IMS API. Great. So what I entered worked. The next step would be to go see how ION processed that message. So I would go back into Infor ION Desk, go to OneView, which is a query tool to see all the messages passing through ION. I can use whatever filters I want to find the document. I don't think much has passed through this tenant in the last hour, so I'll just search for that. Sure enough, in the last hour, a sync sales order bod did come in. This is the ID I used. And I can see that my generic client connected to ION. I can see that the bod I passed in is right here, and it is a sales order bod. And I can see that the WMS application received that bod just a few seconds later. So everything that I did through my document flow, through sending the data through the API, was successful. My next step in this whole flow may be to go into WMS and make sure that it consumed the sales order correctly and that there were no errors. Now, there's much more information in our InfoOS documentation, so look at the link on the screen. It's also in the video text just below this video, so you can just click on it and go there. Pay specific attention to the ION Development Guide, the Desk User Guide, and the API Gateway Administration Guide. Those will be the key documents to help you with all the rest of the details that we couldn't cover today. Thanks for watching.